In this video, we are covering pistol squat progressions, specifically mobility and strength training to get your pistol squat feeling strong and sturdy. First of all, there's several prerequisites that we need in order to achieve a pistol squat. So you're going to need ankle dorsiflexion to allow the knee to track forwards so you don't end up falling back, or so that your heel doesn't come up on its own. We also need knee flexion in order to get contact between the calf and the hamstring, as well as hip flexion to get low. You'll also need hip rotation in order to get to your end range of hip flexion, so you can see how that's a lot of joint requirements just so that you can get to the bottom of the pistol squat, and this is a hard feat for many. If you're not already working on mobility training, or if you don't already naturally have that mobility, you will need to do some mobility training for this. To top it off, you'll also need some decent hip flexor strength, specifically straight leg hip flexor strength, so you don't drag the other leg that's in front of you. If you're getting really stuck on joint testing or knowing what you need, just get in touch below in the comment section or on our website. So ankle dorsiflexion is the first thing we want to address. If you do lack ankle dorsiflexion, no amount of cues will keep your heel down when you're doing a pistol squat or would keep you from falling backwards. So what I recommend here is I'm going to leave a follow along in the description below that you can follow along at your own pace, 2 to 3 times a week if you do lack ankle dorsiflexion. And if this is you, I would recommend using a wedge or an Olympic lifting shoe when you're doing pistol squats so that you can work through your full range of motion and then use your ankle dorsiflexion sessions extra as a side 2 to 3 times a week. Regardless though, as a warm-up, what I would recommend is some deficit heel raises, some weighted ankle dorsiflexion rocking, and even some isometrics at end range in your ankle dorsiflexion if you're really restricted. So the third thing we are covering is knee flexion. If you find this uncomfortable or even painful, there are 2 progressions I would begin with. So the first progression I would use is actually a slant board. I got this one from Slant Board Guy, and it's quite grippy. So here I would get into a split squat and I would get down to the very bottom of what I can handle. And I'm going to pop up a touch and hover here for 5 seconds. Then I'm going to rest for another 5 seconds at the bottom. Then I'm coming back up for 5 seconds, resting again at the bottom for 5 seconds, and then coming back up for 5 seconds. So I'm accumulating 15 seconds at the bottom of close to where my end range is. Now, if you find this a little bit too much, you can actually raise this step onto some blocks or some plates so that you have even less extreme ranges of motion in your hips and your feet. So the second progression is couch stretch knee flexion hovers. You can obviously do this in a couch stretch where your foot is actually up and then trying to keep it up there isometrically, or you can start from the bottom with a small dumbbell and you're going to tuck the hips under, squeeze the glutes and bring the heel up towards your bum, rotate around the dumbbell lightly, so it's a tiny movement, and come back up. So these hovers you can do 6 to 8 reps with. Your hamstring should be on fire. And then as you get better and progress, you can then increase the range of motion and use something like a bench to start off from. The fourth thing we're covering is supersets, where we can superset mobility and strength exercises or 2 mobility exercises to get more time under tension. Also, you want to eventually work towards this anyway by managing to blend your mobility training and your strength training, which is a bit of a process in itself, but this is where it enters the sort of advanced field. This is where, if you're interested in learning much more about this and assessments, the science behind it, and all the different methods and exercises you can use to get from A to B, that's where we have a mobility and strength CPD mobility certification with 4 CPD points, and I'll add the link where you can read more about that in the description below. So next we're doing hip flexion and hip rotation supersets. I'm going to begin with straight leg liftoffs, and you can do this over an object. If you find this particularly hard, you can lean back to begin with, and it makes it a hell of a lot easier. And if you can handle it, you lean forward, bend this leg, hold onto it for dear life, brace, bring the leg up, really thinking of squeezing your quad and pulling your toes in, and come over the object with the leg. So I would do 6 to 8 reps of these, then rest for 1 to 2 minutes, and then do another round. And I'm going to be supersetting this with the assistance of a band going into hip flexion and rotation. So here I'm just setting up the band above me, and I'm going to use the squat rack to hold on to for balance. I'm going to place this around my leg so that what's happening is the band is helping me up into hip flexion and then bringing my leg up into hip external rotation. So here I'm basically just trying to get as far into hip flexion and hip external rotation as I can by using the assistance of the band, and I'll do about 8 reps of these. After the 8 reps of hip flexion to external rotation, I'll do hip flexion to internal rotation, and the band will be helping me there. The key here is it's not very stable, so you really need to think of your hips remaining in line with each other and bracing your core so you don't end up compensating like this and getting basically what looks like a lot of range, but it's actually just your body kind of compensating rather than it actually isolating at the hip. So if you find that easy, then you can move on to the hard version of this, which is basically adding an ankle weight while you do this exercise, supersetted with adding resistance to the other exercise I just showed you. So same thing, holding on for dear life, flexing the toe, squeezing the quad, and going over your object for 6 to 8 reps. I'm going to be supersetting this with the assistance of a band going into hip flexion and rotation. You can adjust the height and weight of the band as needed. I'm going to start light, but here I'm basically using the band as resistance for my hip flexion, keeping my back nice and straight while I do this so I don't end up compensating. So I get true hip flexion, and then when my knee is about in line with my hip, I can then go into external rotation, which is considerably difficult. So we could do our reps there. You probably want to start with a lighter amount of reps, so around 4 to 6 to begin with, until after a few weeks or months you progress and you can go to 8 to 12 reps. And it will be the same with your hip internal rotation, so going up into flexion and trying your best not to compensate and move from other areas like your back or even your leg compensating. So lastly, we're covering technique drills. The easiest place I would begin with is the squat to weight shift to stand up. You can start with however many reps you can handle that get difficult by the last 3 to 4 reps, and you will do this times 3 sets. Then a moderately difficult drill would be to try the pistol squat as a negative, focusing on the tempo of 4-2-1-1 for 6 to 8 reps as a large and in-depth squat as you can handle. So 4-2-1-1 simply means 4 seconds going down, 2 seconds at the bottom, 1 second coming up, 1 second pausing before repeating. Then finally, as a more difficult drill, we have band-assisted pistol squats, as well as hovers at the bottom. Whichever technique drill you can do, I would use that for a normal strength working set, such as 8 to 12 reps times 2 to 3 sets. Picking one variation that you can do well would be plenty 2 times per week. With the band-assisted hovers, the reason we're doing this is so that the leg that is out front of you stops trailing. This is quite a common thing to happen, and this drill is really helpful for that. So the hover is basically for 2 to 3 seconds. Straightening that other leg out as much as you can, usually for 8 to 10 reps. Once you've mastered all of that, you should be capable of doing a pistol squat. If you found this useful, please comment below which of the drills you will be using. Oh, actually, also please subscribe.